What's up, everyone? It's me, Lone. I hope you've been doing all right. Over the past few days, you would have seen that Gamescom is occurring, and as part of that, Bethesda Game Studios released a bunch of new information about Starfield, specifically when it comes to Shatter Space, the new Rev8 land vehicle, which is already in the game, and also some other updates and features as well. So in today's video, I want to talk about all those things, and also just have a general chat about the state of the game and its future, where it might be headed. So if you enjoy this video and want to see more content from me, please like, subscribe if you're new, with notifications if that's possible. But let's jump right into it, talking about Shattered Space. So Shattered Space, as you would know, is going to be the first major story content or expansion for Starfield. It's crazy to say that we haven't had one yet, right? Like when you look at Fallout 4, at this point after the launch of Fallout 4, I believe we already had like 2 or 3 major pieces of story content or DLC for that game. Whereas with Starfield, we still haven't had one yet. We're still waiting. We've had other updates and bug fixes, many bug fixes, new features, even quests in the form of creations, but not a major story expansion or DLC. That is what Shattered Space is meant to be. So a lot of us have been itching for it and do believe it's taken a little bit, maybe too long, but at least we're getting it soon. And speaking of, at Gamescom, Bethesda Game Studios did announce a release date, and it's going to be coming out on the 30th of September or next month, of course, for both Xbox and PC. Now, if you already own the Premium Edition or the Consolation Edition, then you won't need to spend any extra to be able to pick up and play Shattered Space. However, if you just have the base game, or if you play the game on Game Pass, you are going to have to spend a little bit of money to be able to play Shattered Space, and understandably. But that amount is going to be $29 USD, or about $50 AUD if you live in Australia. And that's a decent price tag, right? It's roughly almost half the price of a full price game nowadays. It's decent, right? It's up there. So because of that, I'm hoping there's going to be a good amount of content in this expansion. If you can blast through it in like 5 hours or 10 hours, I suspect a lot of people are going to be upset, especially if they spent the extra money, or even if you have the Premium or Consolation Edition, because you did spend the extra money by buying those higher price editions, right? So I think a lot of people would be quite upset if this thing was only like 5 hours long or 10 hours long. I think for that price, an ideal playtime would at least be something like 20 hours. If not more, I think is ideal. And I'm not talking about repeatable content, right? Not repeatable content to pad out that length. I'm talking about unique, custom content, handcrafted content that is non-repeatable. Of course, alongside new rewards and whatever. I think that would be ideal and that would fit that price tag. Well, let's see how we go. Touch wood, hopefully Bethesda Game Studios delivers. I think they will, because they've been working on this thing for a little bit now. And we also saw some new footage at Gamescom. Not much, they were mostly focusing on the Rev8 vehicle, and we did have a new trailer for Shatter Space released not too long ago, but they released some more footage, and it's obvious. The dark tone of this expansion is clear. It's in stark contrast to the vibe of the rest of the main game, and the main quest in particular. So I like that. It seems to be a nice change of pace, and I do like that we're going to finally be able to know more about House Va'ruun, one of the major, or what is meant to be one of the major factions and clans in the game. We get to know more about them, and also their homeworld as well. So speaking of, let's talk about the plot. I'll leave this linked in the description below, but recently Bethesda Game Studios summarized the plot of Shattered Space nicely, and this is what they had to say. The home planet of House Va'ruun remains a mystery to the vast majority of the citizens of these settled systems. This clandestine faction is primarily known only by their dangerous reputation and violent history. When a distress signal originating from a derelict star station leads you on a path to Va'ruun Kai, you'll begin to uncover the secrets surrounding the followers of the Great Serpent, and ultimately decide the future of House Va'ruun. I like the sound of that. Shattered Space is the first story expansion for Starfield. Explore a brand new, completely handcrafted location and experience the story of House Va'ruun when Shattered Space launches on September 30. The Great Serpent awaits. So again, on paper, this is sounding really good. I like the fact that it's going to be, seemingly anyways, some choice when it comes to House Va'ruun and getting to decide their future. And I do love how it's just one completely handcrafted new location. I mean, part of the issue with Starfield that a lot of people had is that while there might have been a lot of handcrafted content, and Todd Howard said there's more handcrafted content in Starfield than any of our other games, right? Even though that was the case, it didn't quite feel like it, because all that handcrafted content was spread across so many different planets and locations, and it just didn't feel like there was much of it, right? As you were playing the game, it felt like when you were exploring these planets that they were barren and it was mostly procedurally generated. It didn't feel like a Skyrim. It didn't feel like a Fallout 4 where you couldn't walk 2 meters without finding something interesting, right? So even though Starfield on paper technically had a lot of handcrafted content, it didn't feel like that. It didn't quite feel like that, right? So I think that's an issue that a lot of people had with the base game, with Starfield, and it seems like they're trying to address that with Shattered Space. It's all on one planet, their home planet, and it's all going to be there, all of the handcrafted content. So hopefully, yeah, you can't walk 2 meters without finding something interesting. I think that's the idea on paper, and let's see how they go about it. But apparently, some people have actually been playing Shattered Space at Gamescom. There were some previews that were, I don't know if this was released anywhere else, but Colobrial on Twitter, who's very reputable in this space, he posted a bunch of previews that people had about Shattered Space. I'll include that link in the description below, and you can also see it on the screen too. But he's emphasizing that apparently Shattered Space is horror-driven, so again, it emphasizes the darker tone of this expansion. It's also apparently combat-intensive, which is really good. Apparently, you can leave the planet at any time you wish, but the plot is entirely self-contained, and the exploration of the planet and the city will lead to uncovering exactly what happened. So, one, I do like how you can leave the planet whenever. It allows you to go back home, recharge, get some more ammo, and whatever else you need to do some other content if you want to, and then come back to the planet, come back to Shattered Space. So I like that. I like how we're not locked in, but also second as well, I don't mind that the plot is self-contained, right? I don't mind that whatsoever. I understand why they're doing it. From a development perspective, it would be so arduous, so tedious, incredibly difficult to have this plot tie in with the rest of the base game, right? That would just open up a Pandora's box. It would depend upon where you are in the base game and what quest you've completed, and the choices how you make could impact the base game. It would just be so annoying, right? So I understand why they're taking it from that direction. And also as well, it makes sense lore-wise. Like House of Varun, not many people know about them in the settled systems, right? They're secretive, they're living on their own, no one really has any interactions with them. So yeah, whatever you do on their planet should be isolated. It should be self-contained because no one else knows about them. So lore-wise, it makes sense, but I also understand development-wise why they've gone about it in that way. And again, it allows us to go to one location with a bunch of handcrafted content. We're not needed to travel between hundreds, if not thousands of planets to do different quest lines and have it feel all very spread apart, right? So I think this is all sounding very good on paper, but there are more previews here. So Shattered Space's planet apparently has more of an alien world feel, which I like. There's abandoned sci-fi corridors plagued by grim beasts. There's a fear-like atmosphere, and it's a handcrafted world, new weapons, new gear, and new items. So the only thing that I haven't really seen emphasized about Shattered Space yet is that, like, how many characters are going to be there to talk to? I get it. There's grim beasts. There's a lot of aliens, dark theme, and whatever. But especially in the trailer and the footage that we've seen, I haven't seen that many characters that we can talk to, right? Like, I'm not seeing a bustling city or anything like that. Clearly something has happened to this planet, right? And it's happened to House Varun. That's why they're so secretive nowadays. So there's probably not going to be that many people to talk to just because of that lore. But hopefully there's still a decent amount of characters that we get to know and learn and understand and all that good stuff. So hopefully that's the case, but let's see how we go. Let me know what you think about those previews, by the way, in the comments below. And apparently as well, yeah, they've been working on Shattered Space, Bethesda Game Studios, that is. They've been working on Shattered Space since 2023. I believe I read something a while back that they've been working on Shattered Space even just before the launch of the game. They were doing some preliminary work, and then, of course, as the game launched, they continued to ramp up the work on Shattered Space. But they've been working on this thing for well over a year, at least now, right? So because of that, again, I hope there's a decent amount of content in there. I hope it's actually a good piece of story content, a good expansion, a good DLC. But there's also some arguments there, and I've seen people make this argument already, and they use it as a form of criticism, but a lot of people are probably saying that this should have been in the game at launch. And I've never been that guy that's always like, whenever there's a new feature or a new update or story content, I've never been that guy that's like, oh, it should have been in the game at launch. Most of the time, I'm like, yeah, cool. Like, you have to core development somewhere. Like, at some time, you have to say, you know what, we have to stop making new content, stop expanding the scope of the game, and just bloody work on bugs, make sure performance is good, and actually ship the bloody thing. There needs to be a line drawn somewhere, right? So at some stage, you've got to stop working on content like this that, yeah, maybe you wanted to include in the game at launch. But when it comes to Shattered Space, right, I think that possibly they did want some form of questline for House Varun in the game at launch. Why else would they have a trait like the Serpent's Embrace, which allows you to have some unique dialogue related to House Varun? Why would they have that kind of trait in the game at launch and not have much story content related to House Varun? Yes, they came up in the main quest and whatever, but it wasn't that much. Nothing compared to the other factions and clans in the game. So why would that be in the game at launch when there's not much story content related to House Varun? I suspect that they probably wanted to include something like Shattered Space in the game at launch, and that's why they had the trait, but they just didn't get time to be able to do it. At least time to do it justice. So that's why they've taken their time. They're like, you know what, we can do these other faction quest lines, but with House Varun, with Shattered Space, this is the thing that we're going to work on after launch, and we're going to do it justice. And hopefully, again, that means a better quest line. Hopefully that means that, you know, we've talked about this just before with everything being spread out and the handcrafted content not being isolated to one location. If they tried to include this at launch, it probably would have been half-baked and also spread across a lot of different planets and not feel like there was much content there. Hopefully now, because of all that criticism and because they're releasing it well after launch, we're getting a much better Shatter Space than we otherwise would have. So I'm very hopeful. I think the idea on paper is really good, but let's see if they can execute it next month. Now, I do want to talk about the new land vehicle Rev8. This is a free update that when they announced it, they said it was going to be coming that night. Of course, it's out in the game now. You're able to use Rev8. You're able to drive around planets with it. The trailer at Gamescom, by the way, I've got to say, fantastic trailer. Bethesda Game Studios really do an awesome job with their marketing. That trailer had an awesome vibe. The music selection, the footage was sick. It got me so hyped to go back into Starfield, play it, and use this Rev8 vehicle. So they did a great job in that regard. And how do you get it? Well, they posted some helpful instructions by saying the following, quote, ready to head out in the Rev8, visit your favorite city's ship technician to install a vehicle module and you're good to go. Once you have the module in your ship of choice, the Rev8 will automatically deploy right outside your ship whenever you land. That is super convenient, by the way. I love that feature. You can even show off your personal style by customizing the Rev8 with unique colors. And I think there are 3 primary segments that you can recolor. So that's cool. It's cool that there's some customization there. It will cost you 25,000 credits. I'm assuming that most of you already have that because you've been playing the game for a little bit. So it will cost you a little bit, but you're able to get this Rev8 and use it to drive around planets. Now, I think the vehicle looks good. I love the look of it when they teased it a few months ago. I love the look of it now. It's going to clearly make it much easier to explore planets and in particular to survey and scan. And they haven't just done a random like moon rover. I think a lot of us just wanted something to be able to get around faster from A to B, but they put a bit of thought. There's a lot of depth to this vehicle. There's hover jets so you can actually float and get to higher locations. There's a booster to be able to go faster, on ground horizontally. There's a mounted turret so you can actually shoot enemies. There's also armor to protect you from enemies and enemies shooting at you. There's also headlights so you can turn on or off as well. So they're all a nice touch. And I actually do like the look. I like the feel. I just like the fact that we have this cool new land vehicle in the form of the Rev8. Even the drifting around planets look cool because the dust and the sand gets kicked up. It's not just a moon buggy. I would have been happy with a moon buggy, but the Rev8, they put a lot of thought into it, just like they did with spaceships in the game. Clearly not as thought out, not as in-depth as spaceships, but there's enough there that I think a lot of people will be happy with it, especially because it's a free update, so you can't necessarily complain. There's even a little spot there for your companions and Basco, so that's cool, that's a nice touch. And because it's in the game as well, modders are already having a field day with it, right? There are model swaps already for a Jeep, a Halo Warthog, a Star Wars Speeder, and even a NASA Lunar Rover. So that's sick to see. There's even a Rev9 mod, which increases the torque, the speed, and the ability to generate additional boost capacity instantly. So just having this vehicle existing in the game, it opens up so many options when it comes to modding, right? Now a modder doesn't have to do all the work from the ground up to put a new vehicle in the game, right? And that every other mod has to depend upon. The fact that it's done by Bethesda Game Studios means it's done officially and people can just take that model, take that code and do what they want with it. They can swap the model if they want. They can add a freaking Halo Warthog, that is sick. They can make modifications to it. They can tune it, add some cool new weapons or whatever. Because that base model is there, it just allows the modding to happen much easier. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what happens with modding of the Rev8 as the weeks and the months go on. It's just going to make it a lot easier. It opens up so much options when it comes to the modding scene. So I love that. But we've got to talk about it. Should this have been in the game at launch? I just talked about this when it came to Shattered Space. Admittedly, I'm 50-50 on Shattered Space because I still do believe you've got a core development at some stage. However, when it comes to Starfield, right? Because they designed Starfield in such a way where it's 1,000+ planets procedurally generated, and with a lot of them, admittedly, they're barren, right? There's not much to do, and there's a long distance between, points of interest on these planets that you're exploring. Because of that, there's no denying it. Exploring planets, whether or not you enjoyed the process or not, it was still slow. It was still cumbersome. These planets are huge. There is a lot of open, barren space. So it took you a while to get from point A to point B. And that's why people were like, we need a faster way to get around. I understood the premise, and don't get me wrong, I enjoyed exploring planets. To me, it was peaceful. I liked surveying in particular. I liked scanning and walking around. Eventually, it got repetitive, but I had my fun with it. I thought it was relaxing. But there's no denying it took a long bloody time. And that's why a lot of people were asking for a moon buggy. That's why I, in particular, was like, why can't we have a jetpack mod that just shoots you across horizontally just to get you faster from point A to point B? That absolutely would have made planet exploration much more interesting. Maybe not fun necessarily, but at least easier, less slow, less cumbersome. So because of that, I will say this. I think there should have been a way at launch to explore planets faster, to get around faster. Whether or not it was this exact Rev8 or just a simple moon buggy or some other way, some other method of transportation, there should have been something because, yeah, it was too slow. So I do believe they should have had something at launch, especially when you have Phil Spencer. Phil Spencer, the head of Xbox, he was constantly hounding Todd Howard saying, hey mate, I want a faster way to get around these planets. He said recently in an interview that he said to Todd, come on Todd, I want vehicles in this game. I'm tired of walking around this planet. The head of Xbox said that publicly. He's tired of walking around planets. That's not a good look. That's not a good look. I think everyone can agree there should have been something in the game at launch. But I will say this, it didn't necessarily need to be this Rev8 with all these added features. There could have been something a lot more bare bones and a lot more basic. Just something to get around a little bit faster. I understand the realities of development. As I said, you have to call it at some stage. But something that was bare bones and basic that you can improve upon as the months go on. We didn't necessarily need the armor. We didn't necessarily need the turret. We didn't necessarily need the hover boost to get you to higher places. We just needed something basic, something bare bones. And then you develop upon that. Then you improve it. And then 3, 4, 5, 6 months, whatever, a year after launch, it's a much better style of vehicle. It's become from the Rev7 to the Rev8, for instance. They could have done something like that, but there was nothing. There was nothing to get around planets faster, and that fundamentally was the issue. So don't get me wrong, I'm very happy that the Rev8 is now in the game, but there should have been at least something more bare bones in the game at launch or close to launch, right? Whether it was in the first big update after launch or whatever it was, at least in the first month, because anyways, I've talked too much about that. But this is the thing that I will say as well. I understand that this Rev8 vehicle isn't solving the fundamental issue that a lot of people have with exploring planets in Starfield. These planets are largely barren. They're empty. They're procedurally generated. There's not that many points of interest, not many landmarks and things to see and people to talk to and enemies to kill. There's just not, right? It's not like, again, I've used this comparison, but it's not like a place in Fallout 4 or Skyrim where you can walk and find something interesting pretty easily. There's a lot of empty space, and yes, this vehicle is going to make it easier. It's going to make it faster, but there's not new content suddenly. There's not just double the amount of things to see and places to go. It's still the same planets. It's still the same procedurally generated system. So because of that, I don't think a lot of people anyways, are going to necessarily care about this vehicle. They fundamentally don't like the mechanic of the game of exploring these empty planets and having 1,000+ procedurally generated planets. So I hope that this is just a good lesson learned for BGS moving forward when it comes to their games. Clearly, they've already learned this lesson. When it comes to Shattered Space, it's one planet, handcrafted content. It's going to operate very similarly to a Fallout 4 or to a Skyrim, right? So clearly they've heard the feedback and they've listened and there's lessons learned here. But I'm also hoping that they know this moving forward for their future games. I don't think it's going to be an issue with Elder Scrolls 6. Elder Scrolls 6, we know it's going to be one location, one place, and there's going to be a bunch of interesting content to be able to see and things to do, right? I'm also talking about Starfield 2. I hope that they fundamentally change the mechanics of that game if there happens to be a sequel of Starfield. I've said this in the past, I would prefer a handful of smaller but more packed in planets. I don't need 1,000 planets, right? You can still have a smaller amount of planets and have that sense of space travel and exploration, you know what I mean? But by having a smaller amount of planets, you can cram in more handcrafted content that makes people feel like it's more of a Bethesda Game Studios game of old, right? Yes, Starfield in many, many ways is similar to Fallout 4 and to Skyrim, but the one thing that it's different in this regard, it's when it comes to exploration. Like, you have to jump around and be in menus and go to different planets to be able to see all this handcrafted content. People clearly don't really like that. A lot of people don't really like that style of gameplay. So hopefully for Starfield 2, they've learned that lesson, but especially for, they were even thinking about it, for Elder Scrolls 6, hopefully that idea has been nipped in the bud. So I do like the Rev8. I think it's a great addition to the game. Took a little bit long, but it's there. But I understand that for a lot of people, it's not solving the fundamental issue that a lot of you have with Starfield. Like the core mechanic of the game of exploring planets and procedural generation, it's not changing. So I totally get that. But now let's talk about that latest update. So it wasn't just the Rev8 vehicle that was added. There were some new features and bug fixes as well. So let's get into those patch notes. This is patch 1.13.61. And there were a bunch of new graphic settings added to the game, which is really nice to see. So frame rate target, you can now choose between 30, 40, 60, or an uncapped frame rate on VRR displays. But if you don't have a VRR display running 120 Hz, you will still be able to select from 30 to 60. Screen tearing may occur at times when selecting 60 on a non-VRR display. Nice to have that feature there. Also, a prioritize mode. So you can now prioritize between visuals and performance while trying to maintain the frame rate target. If you're choosing a frame rate target of 60 or above, we recommend changing this to performance. That makes sense. Prioritizing visuals keeps the highest resolution while maintaining full detail for special effects, lighting, and crowds. Prioritizing performance lowers internal resolution and detail for special effects, lighting, and crowds. Both modes may adjust internal resolution dynamically when scenes or action get heavier as well. When switching between modes, you will see the lighting change briefly as the system catches up to the new mode. And then we also have VSync. You can now toggle between VSync off or on. Crazy that this wasn't in the game, but again, it's good to have it finally. Choosing off will separate the game's frames from the monitor's refresh rate and may result in screen tearing, understandably. Toggling on, though, will synchronize the frame rate to the monitor's refresh rate, avoiding screen tearing but limiting number of frames. I cannot believe I just thought this was in the game. I usually use VSync, mind you, because like with my capture card, it's just easier. I thought this was an option in the game. That's crazy, man. It's crazy that it wasn't there, but good to see it. I know I'm being very, very sympathetic towards Bethesda, but whatever. It's in the game now. Good. And as we would expect, a bunch of bug fixes as well. For instance, general performance and stability improvements, creations, UI fixes and improvements. When it comes to gameplay, they address an issue that could prevent fully scanning a particular planet. Some gameplay options, they address an issue with legendary weapons that could cause the well-fed and hydrated effects to refresh. Even with graphics, they fix an issue that would cause the frame generation setting to be turned off when DLSS was selected for upscaling for PC. They fixed lighting for ship and station interiors in photo mode. So a bunch of bug fixes, always nice to see with every update. Like Starfield is in a pretty good state right now. I thought the game ran pretty well at launch. I know a lot of you would have had your issues, as is expected with a new game launch, but I would still say that Starfield was in the best state compared to any other Bethesda Game Studios game at launch, whether that's Fallout 4 or Skyrim or whatever. Starfield was in a decent state at launch, but now it's in an even better state. We have all these new features when it comes to graphics and settings and whatnot, especially for the U on console as well. We have the Rev8 land vehicle, and of course we have Shatter Space coming very, very soon. So all in all, I would say that Starfield is in a pretty good state, but we need to talk about the future. What's going to be happening with Starfield moving forward? As you would expect, we're probably going to be having more and more creations. They brought creations to Starfield to the ire of many, many fans. I know a lot of you don't like creations, but as you would know this, they're going to be releasing more creations for Starfield. We're obviously going to see more of that stuff. For instance, in the past few days, they released a new creation called the Escape, kind of like the Vulture creation. So the description of this one is that you're trapped on a remote star station and you must solve puzzles and make unlikely allies to escape with untold riches and your life. But to start it, you speak to a recruiter at the Astral Lounge to learn more. So Sounds cool, right? Sounds interesting, puzzles and things to solve. And if you want to play this thing, it costs 500 credits. And I've talked about this in the past. If you are in the US, for instance, 1,000 credits costs about $9.99 USD, which means that this creation in particular is about $5 USD if you want to be able to play it, right? It's annoying because you have to buy a certain amount of credits and it doesn't, cut nicely like that. But roughly, it's about $5 USD. And yes, some people will still think that that's too high for a single quest, but I will say this. It is cheaper than the Vulture. A lot of people had an issue with that previous creation, the Vulture, because that was 700 credits. That was $7 USD. By reducing the price to $5, I think that indicates that they're listening. And Todd Howard did talk about this. He was like, look, we have a lot of feedback in that regard. We know the prices are a little bit too high for some people. I think this shows that they're listening, right? The price is lower. Only $2 lower, but that's still an improvement, right? It's a small improvement, but it's still an improvement. And apparently the creation is actually pretty good. The quest is pretty good. There was this one person on Reddit that was like, it's worth purchasing. There's clever puzzle designs with multiple approaches. Of course, you get a couple of rewards at the end, depending upon how you finish it. And apparently it takes over an hour to complete. So maybe not long enough for some of you out there. But there are different ways to do the room. There's some repeatability or replayability in that regard. It's better than the Vulture, which was 700 credits. So I will just say this. It seems like BGS is taking on feedback, but I understand that a lot of you just don't care about creations. You don't agree with the concept of the creations. You don't like paid mods or whatever effectively is paid mods, and you're never going to engage with that system. You're going to stick with free mods on PC, right? I completely understand that. And it seems like a decent amount of you, because of that train of thought, aren't picking up this thing. So far, only about 33,000 people have picked up The Escape, this new creation, which is not that many people. Granted, not many people are playing Starfield at the moment because it's a bit of a dead period. It's a bit of a lull period for the game. And I'll talk about that in a second. But maybe it'll improve when Shatter Space comes out and people come back to the game. Maybe people will try it out. But 33,000 people is not a lot. So I'm worried about creations moving forward, like especially if now modders aren't getting paid a set amount to create a creation. They're sharing in the revenue of the sales of these creations. Are they making much off the sale of 33,000, especially if Bethesda Game Studios is still getting a cut and Steam is getting a cut somewhere along the line? I don't know, man. Let's see how it all goes. But next up, we do need to talk about a potential PS5 release for Starfield. I think this is on the card for Starfield. I absolutely do. We know that Xbox has started to release more games onto PS5, their first-party games from the PS5. Earlier this year, we saw Hi-Fi Rush, we saw Grounded, Pentiment, and Sea of Thieves all come to PS5. And we now know that Indiana Jones and the Great Circle is eventually also going to be coming to PS5. Not at launch, it's technically a timed exclusive, but eventually we will see that game on PS5. And because of what Phil Spencer has said recently, I suspect Starfield's going to be coming to PS5 later as well. This is what he had to say, quote, "Our franchises are getting stronger. Our Xbox console players are as high this year as they've ever been. So I look at it and I say, okay, our play numbers are going up for the console platform. Our franchises are as strong as they've ever been. And we run a business. It's definitely true inside of Microsoft. The bar is high for us in terms of the delivery we have to give back to the company because we get a level of support from the company that's just amazing and what we're able to go do. So I look at this, how can we make our games as strong as possible? Our platform continues to grow on console, on PC, and on cloud. It's just going to be a strategy that works for us. So essentially what Phil Spencer was saying is that even though we release some of our best first-party IP onto our biggest competing platform in the form of the PlayStation 5, that is Hi-Fi Rush, Grounded, Pentiment, and Sea of Thieves, even though we did that, we haven't stopped growing. Our growth hasn't stifled. We're still growing in all areas. Yes, hardware sales are definitely struggling, and Phil Spencer didn't really allude to that. But in other areas, yeah, they're increasing in player count numbers. More people are on Xbox platforms than ever before. They still seem to be growing as a company, while at the same time reaping in all the additional revenue from selling these games direct to PlayStation 5 consumers. Doing that just opens up a new audience, opens up new revenue streams, while they're continuing to grow in other areas. So I understand the strategy. I would still like to see the numbers, though, to see whether if Phil Spencer is really telling the truth in that regard. But I understand the strategy. They're going to be doing it with Indiana Jones, and I suspect they're eventually going to be doing it with PlayStation 5. So, because let's be real about the situation. One, They acquired Bethesda and Activision Blizzard for like combined total of $80 billion. They need to grow. They can't just stay at the same level of revenue and growth. They need to go from this to freaking this to be able to appease Microsoft. They're not going to be happy if they just stagnate after spending $80+ billion in acquisitions. So that's one. But also two, these developers still have targets of their own. Bethesda Game Studios still have targets they have to hit. It's not just about how well their games do on Game Pass. They're still selling their games direct to consumers on PC and on Xbox for people that don't have Game Pass. So by opening up the PlayStation 5 audience, it allows them to hit those targets even quicker and even easier. Now, if PlayStation 5 is part of the equation, those targets probably go up a little bit, but I understand the logic. It's opening up an additional source of revenue. So I very much suspect that Starfield eventually is going to be coming to PlayStation 5. Right now, it's not moving any more consoles for Xbox. It's not really generating any more sales of Game Pass. Like, more people aren't signing up to Game Pass to be able to play Starfield. That hype period, that launch period is done. So how does Bethesda Game Studios as a developer make more money from Starfield? They sell it on PlayStation 5. I think it's going to happen eventually, and then Creations is part of that, DLC is part of that. So that's what I believe, but let me know what you think in the comments below. And I also think that it probably needs it. In terms of player counts, we can't see player count numbers on Game Pass or Xbox, but player counts are pretty low at the moment. I had a look at the 24-hour peak player count for Steam, and it's currently at 10,814 people. So it's not the whole picture. Again, Game Pass and Xbox is not part of those numbers, but it's still pretty low. It's lower than Fallout 4, it's lower than Skyrim, which are way older games. Yes, Fallout 4, increased from the success of the Fallout TV show, but that high period is done now. That's very much settled. And still, Fallout 4 has more players than Starfield at the moment on Steam. So I think they would very much benefit from having a new audience on the PlayStation 5. So what do you all think? What do you think about the state of Starfield and its future? Let me know in the comments below. It's nice to be back making videos. I promise you, by the way, for those of you that are stuck around this long, I am going to have a video in the coming week or so, hopefully, that explains what the future of this channel is, because I've been thinking about a lot of stuff. A lot of stuff has been happening behind the scenes, but let me know what you think in the comments below. And until next time, this has been the Lone Vault Wanderer. Please take care of yourselves, and would you kindly keep fighting the good fight.